but you're the first person to really cobble together this
Mhm,
story and make
mhm,
it one from start to finish of Ed Gein's childhood to the crimes thereafter. When you're
mhm,
going through the media coverage then of it, I mean, how did you separate it and sift from fact to fiction?
mhm.
What was real about Eddie Gein, what wasn't?
Well, I did a lot of deep research. I went to Plainfield, spoke to people who knew him, spoke to people who had been inside his house. I interviewed psychiatrists who had treated him. I had access to uh, court records and psychiatric records. It is true, however, I mentioned earlier Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, obviously a very, very famous book. Capote called his book a nonfiction novel, uh, by which he meant that he was employing fictional techniques in telling a factual tale. And we've come to know that there are many things in Cold Blood that were pretty much a product of Capote's creative imagination. In fact, the whole climactic scene of the book was pure invention on Capote's part. What Capote called a nonfiction novel has come to be known as creative nonfiction. Again, where you're employing these kind of novelistic techniques because there's certain things you couldn't know. And, uh, I was consciously emulating Capote's approach when I wrote Deviant. So, which is to say that there are certain scenes, particularly the beginning with his mother, that based on the documentary evidence I had about his relationship with his mother, I allowed myself uh, to create these scenes because nobody really knows exactly the dialogue that took place between them. Um, so yeah, so in the years since I wrote Deviant, I've come to think of myself not as so much a true crime uh, writer, but a crime historian. So in the books I've written over the last 20 or 30 years, they're very scrupulously documented and footnoted. There's nothing in any of my books over the last 20 or 30 years that I can't point to a specific primary document that was the source of it. When I wrote Deviant, again, I was kind of taking as my motto. I'm sure you and your listeners are aware of Ken Kesey's book, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The very last line of the first chapter, which I used to teach because I was a professor of American literature for many years, the narrator, the big chief, says, "You have to believe me, it's the truth, even if it didn't happen." and
I like that. I like that.
and that was my conscious motto for some of what I was doing, with Deviant. My task was to take thousands of pages of dry material and turn it into a compelling story. And in order to do that, you have to apply these novelistic techniques. So, that's what I was doing in my book.